I want to
Thank
talk
you.
about the correspondence that you have had as a special rapporteur for the UN with the IOC and with regard to these athletes from Russia and Belarus. Can you take us back to the original correspondence you sent to the IOC, suggesting that all was not well with them being banned from competition?
So the IOC decided that in favor of the banning of Russia and Belarus from the any sports competitions, and we're absolutely fine with that. My mandate as the UN Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights concerns the human rights of athletes, but also of cultural artists, etc., and their non-discrimination on the basis of their nationality. So we wrote a letter to them saying that banning the Russian and Belarusian athletes just on the basis of their nationality is against one of the major principles of international law. And if we all agree, and I think that humanity agrees, that this is an illegal war, this is an illegal war because it goes against the principles we have all agreed that run humanity. So the prohibition of discrimination is another such principle that we all agree should run and runs humanity. So you cannot violate the human rights of these athletes in order to show our support to Ukraine and how problematic we feel that the war is. And the OSCE then said that they would like to meet up with us and they would like to discuss with us the issue. And we were grateful to do so. They issued on the 25th of January, as you know, they issued a statement saying again that they support Ukraine, again that the two countries, Russia and Belarus, are not going to be able to participate in sport events. But they mellowed down the ban, so they said that for the athletes they can compete with neutral flags. This is not the first time. This has happened before. For example, with Yugoslavia. So they will participate with a neutral flag, and they also said that they have to, in order to participate, they have to not have acted against the peace mission of the IOC by actively supporting the war in Ukraine. So we said to them that, again, this is discrimination. They should stick to what they expect the other athletes to have done. We have not seen any such conditions in other war situations or in other situations of gross violations of human rights. And that's why we said that, these athletes should have exactly the same treatment as all other athletes, which would cover, by the way, propaganda in favor of the war, because this is not justified expression. So the IOC or the state should say that this is unacceptable. It should ban having the signs in support of the war, because again, that would be unacceptable according to the IOC Charter and human rights. So I think this is we really have, if we are all united against the war, we're all united because of how it violates our sense of justice. And I think it is very important, especially in this occasion, to maintain our sense of justice and maintain and uphold the basic principles of human rights, which is the prohibition of direct discrimination on the basis of nationality.
So I know you've written back to the IOC and commended them on revisiting this area, but there's been a lot of criticism in the public, hasn't there? Because they say, but the human rights of the Ukrainians are being violated by the Russian state and the Belarusian state. How can you let people from those countries into the Olympic Games, which is all supposed to be about peace and the world coming together?
I think that it is very important to remember that human rights is not about tit for tat So, human rights do not involve reciprocity. Yes, I agree that the human rights of Ukrainians, and rather the human rights of everyone, Ukrainians or not, inhabiting in Ukraine, are violated. And I have come out and I have said that in very clear terms repeatedly with press releases and also in the interactive dialogue that I've had at the UN. However, you do not really support people living in Ukraine, and you do not support human rights by violating the human rights of other people. And also, we are talking about human beings. We are not talking about governments. And Russians, we know now that there is the human rights situation inside Russia is pretty bad. So, people have been pushed to participate in the war. If people are asked to be neutral or not to come out in support of the war, they will face repercussions in Russia. So I think it is very important to remember that these athletes have very nothing to do with the decisions that are being taken in Ukraine. And we have to show our humanity, especially when the situation is bad. So human rights is not about acting in accordance with them to people that we agree with and to people that we find as close to us. Human rights are there, and the states have signed and ratified specific human rights obligations exactly for the situations where we disagree with the individuals, we disagree with their opinions, we disagree with how they are acting, but we still uphold their human rights, especially not to be discriminated just because of their nationality. And as I said, the IOC says very clearly that Russia and Ukraine are not going to take part in sporting events. And I want to draw attention here. This is just an example of sports people, but we have seen a lot of similar situations when it comes to artists, composers, etc., who have been expelled and who continue to be expelled from international competitions or festivals, etc., just on the basis of their nationality. And we think that this is, this is quite difficult to comprehend. These are not people that took this decision. These are people who suffered to a much lesser degree with the decisions of the Russian Federation every day within the territory of the Russian Federation. We should stand in solidarity with the individuals against the decisions of the Russian government.
Is this one of the most difficult aspects of your job? In some ways, almost separating, the national flags to the reality of the people, and the difficulty in that, because we know we've lived through the Cold War, we've lived through other wars. We see some wars as good wars, we see others as not good wars because we're on the side of right, in inverted commas. So how do you wrestle with that in your job? And I guess it's one of those things that we could say it's very complex, or alternatively, it's actually very simple if every human life is judged on the same value.
Yes, this is one of the most enjoyable parts of my role. I promised when I was appointed that I would be objective, and I am not going to be torn by interests or specific bias that I have. And I think that in my job, one of the most enjoyable because it is an unpaid role, one of the most enjoyable aspects is trying to find the nuances in each debate and stand for human rights, because states have political interests, and they should, because they need to support the safety and the interests of their inhabitants. But the United Nations and the organs of the United Nations have the priority of human rights. So there is somebody above the states and maybe above politics that is here to ring the bell and say, let's try to ensure that all debates are nuanced and the human rights of individuals and groups are upheld. So I find this, really enjoyable.
Alexandra Xanthaki, thank you so much for joining us today and explaining a little bit of that very complex situation and a very nuanced one. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.